All right, today's video is not about drumming. It's just about the signal for the drums. Okay, so as some of you have asked me, what are those mic cables that you're using on your drums? What I use on the drums, I actually make this. It's just a snake that I make from install cord. Everyone's asking why so thin? Well, this is just installation cord. Now, the best microphone cable that there is Mogami. Belden makes a good cable. This is a Belden install cable. This is just a standard XLR Belden signal cable. All right, a microphone cable for just general purpose is still a standard XLR, and the only difference really is the shielding. There's still 3 pins in this. An XLR cable is a balanced cable. All right, so now with a balanced cable, you can do some things that you can't do with an unbalanced cable. So whenever you connect a microphone cable, you always want it to be an XLR. You always want it to be balanced. All right, as you can see, there's 3 pins in there. There's a hot, a cold, and a ground. This cable is thicker, mostly because it has thick rubber around the cable itself. But on the inside, the guts are relatively the same. There's still 3 pins, a hot and a cold and a ground. Usually it ends up being red, black, and the ground usually ends up being some type of silver-coated or copper-coated wire. All right, you have to know that copper-coated wire is a good wire if it's real copper, but they've blended copper with all types of other metals, so copper is not always the best wire for conductivity. Okay, the best wire to use is silver. Silver conducts much, much better. Silver is a much better cable. It's a lot more expensive, but it's expensive for a reason. Now, let me explain this. So inside this, there's shielding. A shielding in a cable like this is usually braided. Shielding usually helps to keep other interference out, but it's very, very rare that you're going to have any type of interference with most recording configurations unless you have some type of really strange ground faults going on throughout the building. Live, you could have all kinds of problems with grounding. Is the event using a generator? Does the building have tons of fluorescent lights or whatever? I don't have fluorescent lights here in the studio, but you could still have transformers inside the lights that create buzzing and stuff. But still, the thinner install cable will still provide enough shielding and enough solid connectivity to where it's not going to create any buzz. I like using this specifically because it's low profile. The cables aren't creating a lot of weight on the microphone and so on and so forth. But again, I use this install cable both for live and in the studio. This is a cable that I started making. I've strapped tight, but you can see that this is only a 4-channel cable. So I put shrink wrap on it, and then I give it the fan at the end. Again, this is only 4. What I use here on the drums is 8, and then I use maybe a couple other standard cables for the overheads and the room mics. Okay, so again, this is my favorite cable to use both live and in the studio. Now let me explain something about XLR cable. XLR cable is a balanced cable. It can provide signal over 1,000 feet, usually about 1,000 feet before any type of denigration. You can go even up to a mile, even up to 2,000 feet. And you can't do that with an unbalanced cable. An XLR cable is balanced, and it has pin 1, 2, and 3, hot, cold, and ground. A 1/4-inch balanced cable is called a TRS, which is tip, ring, sleeve. Tip, ring, sleeve. The problem is that most guitar chords and most keyboard chords are unbalanced. So there's only a tip and a sleeve. So you don't have the ring. So it's not a balanced chord. Anything over 20 feet with an unbalanced chord ends up denigrating the sound. It starts dropping off. And that's a big deal. So again, with a balanced cable, you can run, 1,000 feet to 2,000 feet, which is about a mile, before any type of denigration. A standard 1/4-inch cable for keyboard or guitars, after 20 feet, it starts dropping off. It starts denigrating. And it doesn't matter how thick it is. It makes no difference. It matters how thick it is when it comes to a speaker or a power configuration. The thicker, the less resistance. The more copper you have in a power cord, the thicker that it is, the more power you can run through it. And that's the reason why it's important to have thicker cables for your speakers if they're passive, if they're not active, or if they are standard non-powered speakers. If you have an active speaker that is powered, you just run an XLR cable to it. And again, you can run up to a mile without any type of signal loss. So with a TRS, this is just a stereo cord for my headphones, tip, ring, sleeve. That's really the main configuration that you'll find on a 1/4-inch cable, tip, ring, sleeve, which is the tip ends up being the right channel, the ring ends up being left channel, and the sleeve ends up being the ground. That's different from a standard microphone cable. It doesn't work like that. So again, the thicker microphone cable just has more rubber on it. It doesn't change anything about how it sounds. The main thing that a thicker cable might have is more braiding around it. So that's really the best thing about a thicker cable, is it might have more braiding for the shielding. But other than that, an install cable works just as good. Usually the shielding is more of a sheet, more maybe like an aluminum sheet or something like that. That shields it. It works fine. Again, if you're going to run an XLR cable 1,000 feet, which sometimes you do, like when I've run sound for festivals where it's been a football field and I'm at one end of the field with the front of house console and the stage is on the far end of the field. That's 100 yards is about 300 feet. And then you've got the end zones and sometimes you're up in the bleachers. So you'll be at about 1,000 feet. So if when you're wanting to run your signal to the stage, and I've done that before, and there's no denigration. When you run that far, lots of times you'll want to use a thicker cable just because it's a little bit more solid. The ends grip the cable quite a bit tighter. I almost always use Neutrik connectors. Neutrik. There's no sense in ever buying any of the cheaper stuff. It's better if you get lesser expensive cable with a good connector. The connectors are what goes bad more than anything. If you're wanting to put a snake together for your drums, both live or for the studio, the install cable is the way to go. A standard mic cord just ends up being more cumbersome. That's about it. The install cable is actually quite a bit less. Just make sure that you get Neutrik connectors. I went to a conference called SONODCOM. It is designed specifically for engineers. It's something that was held up in Michigan. I think it was at the EV plant. I learned a few things there, but the biggest thing that I learned about microphone cable and how it translates into distance and sonic quality and things like that. Again, you'll find almost no difference between an install cable and a standard thicker mic cable. You'll find that the install cable is easier to solder. I love soldering that cable. It's very easy to use, it's easy to strip, and it's a solid connection. But if you use a Neutrik connector, it grips the cable. If you have some other connectors, they don't grip the cable very well. And so just stay away from those. That's the biggest thing that I learned at SONODCOM. So at this conference in SONODCOM, when I heard that you could actually run a standard XLR cable, up 1,000 plus feet, I was actually surprised. But then I put it into use in these years since then, and it's absolute. So that should help you out a lot. Just remember that when you're in the studio, you're just not going to find too many problems. If you have buzzing within your transformers of your lights or something like that, you need to get different lights. You don't want that in the studio because that's not going just into your microphones. That's going in through the rest of your gear as well. I've got a buddy of mine who has a very strong recording studio, and he switched to a different piece of recording gear. And it's a very high-end, one of the brand new Pro Tools setups. And he had a Pro Tools setup, but he went to one of the new Pro Tools setup, and he changed just that out, and all of a sudden he has all this noise. So he had to go through everything he had to get that noise out. That is usually because of one simple thing. And you never want to lift your ground either. You always want to keep your ground solid. All right, so I hope that helps you out a lot. Again, this was more for engineers or drummers looking to put together drum snakes, either in the studio or live. And this should help you out a lot, especially in the years to come. It has helped me quite a bit throughout the years. Any engineer that wants to know anything about it, if you have any questions, just send your comments and we'll go from there. Take care. See you next time. Cheers.